This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
From now, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert will begin his first summit with U.S. President George W. Bush at the White House. Earlier, he met with U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. The Bush-Olmert meeting will be followed by a joint press conference, a working dinner, and a private conversation between the two leaders. Last night, Olmert met with U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley. Prime Minister's aides described the talks as excellent. Israeli officials said Rice expressed great interest in Olmert's plan for a unilateral Israeli withdrawal in the West Bank. Olmert is expected to promise Bush that he will be willing to devote 6 to 9 months to finding a Palestinian negotiating partner before beginning to implement his convergence plan. Also high on the agenda in tonight's Bush-Olmert talks will be the Iranian crisis. The U.S. president is expected to reiterate his pledge that his country will protect Israel against the nuclear threat from Tehran. Aliza Olmert, wife of the prime minister who accompanied her husband to Washington, told Israeli reporters that she hopes her husband's convergence plan will be implemented. Meanwhile, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak revealed today that he is planning a three-way summit between himself, Olmert, and PA Chairman Mahmoud Abbas to take place in Sharm el-Sheikh at the beginning of June. We return now to the upcoming White House summit between U.S. President George W. Bush and Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, scheduled to begin in a few hours' time from now. Both U.S. and Israeli officials have been lowering expectations for the summit. However, this first meeting between the two leaders is of great significance. This according to Alon Pinchas, former Israeli Consul General in New York. A short time ago, he spoke with IBA's Leah Zinder in our Tel Aviv studio.
I don't think the expectations were high to begin with. No one thought that the president, who has a different agenda, who is domestically, politically severely weakened lately, who has Iran and oil prices and Iraq to contend and deal with, who has congressional elections, or his party does, in November, I don't think that he was expected by Olmert to endorse the disengagement plan as a package and say, I've seen it, I'm signing, I'm giving my John Hancock on the bottom. He wasn't expected to do that, in which case the expectations, I don't think, were ever, are not low now, and they were not high to begin with.
You mentioned Iran. I imagine that the important things to be said by the President and by the Prime Minister about Iran will be said in the private one-on-one talks following their working dinner tonight.
Well, yes, obviously the substantive issue of Iran will be dealt with in the face-to-face meeting. I can only imagine that the issue was raised with Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, when they met tete-a-tete, four eyes. And I assume that there will be some reference or some allusion to Iran in the press conference that the President and Prime Minister Olmert will hold after the working session and after the one-on-one meeting. I cannot imagine the President of the United States of America and the Prime Minister of Israel standing up in front of the world press and not mentioning Iran even once. That being said, I don't know how detailed that conversation is going to be. There are certain questions that need not to be asked, and there are certain answers that are better kept private.
Now, as someone who has been a senior aide to 4 of Israel's foreign ministers, what advice would you give to Prime Minister Olmert on this, his first summit with President Bush?
Keep it simple. Keep it friendly. Engage the president. Make sure that this visit is not an exercise in futility, in that everyone is going to be judging you by the quality or the contents of the final statement, the press conference. Make sure that this visit will prove to be the basis for an ongoing relationship for at least the next 2 years. Don't assume that there are going to be many visits like this. The president is distracted. We are not on his radar screen. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It's an issue of judgment and evaluation, but we're not. He has oil prices. He has Iran. He has relations with China. He has Iraq to get out of. Whether or not Ehud Olmert wants to disengage from part of the West Bank doesn't really concern the president, and you need not to overburden his agenda and his mind with details that can be left to a later date.
وعلى محور آخر أغلقت الجرافات الإسرائيلية الطريق.
Israeli bulldozers closed off the main road that links Dhabi to the holy city of Jerusalem. This is part of the separation wall project, which aims at isolating Palestinian residents from their surrounding areas.
تواصل السكان مع محيطهم الخارجي.
The events of the past 25 years are running through the mind of Ibrahim as he stands outside his restaurant, looking at the Israeli bulldozers closing off the main road that links the towns of Dhabi and Ram in northern Jerusalem. Ibrahim's restaurant used to be full of customers, but after Israel closed off the road, many people will not be able to go to the restaurant or the adjoining area unless they are willing to take lengthy bypass roads.
Our business has suffered for the last 5 years, but this is going to completely destroy us. These kinds of closures will cause total destruction. For the past years, we were just barely breaking even. We did not close the restaurant because we did not have anything else that we can do. We were forced to stay steadfast.
Ibrahim says that what happened 5 years ago may become a permanent tragedy for 120,000 Palestinian residents living in the Dhabi and Ram townships, because they will be isolated by the Israeli wall, not only from Jerusalem, but also from the surrounding areas.
In the area we are standing now, all the Palestinians have Israeli ID cards because all these areas were considered part of Jerusalem. Now, these areas are being completely isolated according to a plan by the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to ensure a Jewish majority and an Arab minority in Jerusalem. What is happening today is the application of this plan.
The Israeli wall has a lot of negative effects on the living conditions of Palestinians living in the isolated areas. Schools and kindergartens will also be harmed because many Jerusalemites will face increasing difficulties to get to them.
If the situation becomes very difficult, then the people in charge may build another school branch in Ram, especially if there is a complete closure.
I am waiting for her to come here, but she will have to make a huge detour either in Qalanjia or Ram. As you see, Ram will be closed off soon.
The story of Dhabi and Ram will repeat many times over as the construction of the separation wall continues. The length of this wall exceeds 790 kilometers and isolates large areas of Palestinian lands from its people. Some of the Palestinian residents are forced to live in areas under the Palestinian Authority. Israel claims that it would rather reach a solution, but on the ground, it imposes a difficult reality on the Palestinians. Decisions made by Israeli ministers get the blessings of the White House and the international community, as if they do not know anything about what is happening.
The Jewish state has adopted a new method of searching for information on missing servicemen in Lebanon. The Israeli organization charged with looking for the Israelis in sending fax letters to commercial institutions in the southern port city of Sidon and to the Ojero telecommunication company in Bint Jbeil, with the pictures of the men while promising anonymity to anyone who provides information on their whereabouts. The Israeli organization has also set up a website. In addition, $10 million will be granted to any person who does come forward with information concerning Air Force navigator Ron Arad, who has been missing since his aircraft was shot down over Lebanon in 1986, 2 other soldiers missing since 1982, and another who disappeared in the Golan Heights since August 1997. Similar letters were sent in April 2005 through Liban Post in Sidon.
مشاهدينا مساء الخير. 8:00 في عمان. إليكم نشرة الأخبار من التلفزيون الأردني.
Welcome to Jordan TV News. The General Intelligence Department revealed on Tuesday details about the arrest of the member of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Ziad Khalaf Raja Qarbuli, who kidnapped and killed the Jordanian driver Khalid Dasu'i in the Terbil area in Iraq last September. Security sources said that under directives of His Majesty King Abdullah II, the GID Forsan al-Haq group, in cooperation with Battalion 71 of the Jordanian Armed Forces Special Operations, chased the criminal and arrested him outside of Iraq. The killer Al-Qarbali, who was in charge of hostages and war loot for Al-Qaeda in the Ratba area, took advantage of his position, which enabled him to inspect the border crossings to carry out his crimes.
الكربولي الذي كان مسؤول الغنائم في تنظيم القاعدة في منطقة الرطبة استغل عمله مخلصا في الحدود العراقية لتنفيذ جرائمه.
Shahid, Amar, Shaza, Ahmed, and Marah. They are the children of the Jordanian driver, Khalid al-Dasuki, who was killed by an official from the Al-Qaeda organization after he was kidnapped last September, more than 6 months after he left his 2 widows and children to go to Iraq. However, his family still remembers the details of his first trip as he headed towards Baghdad.
ما تزال تذكر تفاصيل رحلته الأولى نحو بغداد.
اجى من الشغل الله يرحمه يوم 3 العصر اخذ جوازه ونزل طلع من الدار.
God have mercy on him. He came from work on Tuesday afternoon. He took his passport and left home. When he got approved, he returned home. He ate his meal quickly. He took a blanket and water. His oldest son, Ahmed, came to eat with him. He ate quickly. Marah, his youngest daughter, and Ammar, his youngest son, were screaming, "Dad, Dad." He told them, "I'm going and I'll return tomorrow night."
والولد الصغير عمار صاروا يعيطوا يا بابا يا بابا. حكى لهم يا بابا رايح بكره جاي لكم بالليل. نزلت اوصله انا.
I went to drop him off. He hugged and kissed me. He said to take care of the family.
صار يحكي لي سلامة ودور بالك عبده.
لم يكمل خالد رحلته. فعلى بعد كيلومترات من حدود الرويشد.
Khalid did not complete his journey. Only several kilometers from the Ruwaishid border, he was kidnapped by a group of men belonging to Al-Qaeda, which is headed by the terrorist Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Under orders of His Majesty King Abdullah II, the GID Forsan al-Haq group, in cooperation with Battalion 71 of the Jordanian Armed Forces Special Operations, chased the criminal and arrested him outside of Iraq. This is the killer, Ziad Khalaf Raja al-Qarbuli. He is from the Qaim area. He recollects the details of his crime, the killing of al-Dasuki, who was kidnapped by one of Qarbuli's assistants, who also works as a border inspector in the border area of Terbil.
اختطفه أحد معاونيه الذي يعمل مثله مخلصا جمركيا في منطقة حدود الطريبية.
لقيت نبهان سلمت عليه، سلمت على ياد أخوي قلت له شكو، فقال لي نبهان هذا السائق خطفت لك إياه من الرتل وجبته.
When Nabhan, my brother, came, I greeted him. I asked him, "Who is this man?" He said, "He's a Jordanian driver and works abroad with Americans." At the time, I had directions from Yasser Mahmoud al-Harbi that any Jordanian must be taken. Since Jordanians, specifically the government of Jordan, is cooperating with the Americans and transporting goods to them, there was a lot of hatred towards Jordan by Al-Qaeda organization. Any Jordanian must be taken.
فقد عليها قوي من تنظيم القاعدة، يعني أي أردني يأخذونه. So
I called Thuraya Abu Azzam, who was a military commander filling the position of Abu Ubaida. Now the man in charge is Muhammad al-Harbi. I told Abu Azzam the story and he told me to safeguard the Jordanian, safeguard the Jordanian. He said, "I will send you senior men to take him." I asked what to do with him. He told me to put him in the trunk of the car and park it away from me. So I went to the hostage, whose name was Khalid. He was fat. Nabhan and I took him and put him in the trunk of the car. At the time, his hands were handcuffed behind his back with wide duct tape. So we put him in the car. Then I drove him about 1.5 kilometers away from my caravan. I put him in my car, which belongs to Al-Qaeda organization, and I drove him away from the caravan about 1.5 or 2 kilometers away. I parked the car behind the Balad al-Khairat restaurant. Abu Azzam said that he will send his men to take him, and he told me the description of them, but I forgot the description now. But I remember the type of the car he told me they will come in, small black Ford. They were supposed to come and take him. Supposedly, they were 150 to 160 kilometers away, a distance of no more than 1 hour. But 1 hour passed and they did not come. So I called Abu Azzam. I told him the story and I asked him what to do. He told me to wait a little bit. I had put the Jordanian in the trunk shortly before sunset. I would return to the car and come back several times. The Americans were constantly looking for the Jordanian. The hostage had a tow truck that would carry cars and products, and it was parked far away, so we kept it there. I returned to the caravan on foot. Nabhan and Iyad were sitting there. I told them to go away from the caravan because I was afraid that the Americans would search the caravan, God forbid. I did not want anyone to be caught. I called Abu Azzam and told him that these men were late. So he told me to wait half an hour and he would call me back. He called back and said that the men were very late and would not be able to take the hostage. So he said to take the hostage and kill him. That is an order, he said. I said, God willing.
فقال لي صبر لي نص ساعة وأنا أرد لك الخبر. دق علي تليفون قال زياد ذول عاطلين وأنت ما راح تقدر تجيبه، أخذه وقتله بالأمر. قلت له إن شاء الله. أخذته.
The hostage was in the trunk of the car. I took the car about 4 to 5 kilometers to the street we call Qadim, which is parallel to the highway. His name was Khalid Dusu'i. I told him to get out of the car. What are you going to do? I said, I'm going to kill you. So he started pleading with me, saying, don't kill me. I pulled my personal gun and told him to say the Shahada. While he was bleeding, he said the Shahada. So immediately I shot him twice in the head. He fell on the ground. His hands were still tied behind his back. I made sure that he was dead. I put his papers and passport on the top of his body. Then I returned to the caravan.
أنا عاد قتلته تأكدت من عنده إنه مات، حطيت جوازه وأوراقه فوقه ومشيت. رجعت وين؟ إلى كرفاني.
May 24th, falling on the 3rd of Khordad, reminds the Iranian nation of a joyous and glorious occasion. On such day, 24 years ago, the Iranian Army, Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, and devoted Basij volunteer forces liberated the southwestern town of Khorramshahr after 19 months of occupation by Saddam's forces. The magnificent achievement, which came at the culmination of 26-day operations codenamed Beit al-Muqaddas, was an inspiring breakthrough for the Iranian forces, so much so they managed to inflict successive crushing defeats on the aggressive occupation forces. The Iraqi ambassador to Tehran says Baghdad favors measures to energize diplomatic ties with its main trading partner, Tehran. Mohammed Majid al-Sheikh said in an exclusive interview with JNN on Tuesday, further elaborated on Tehran-Baghdad ties.
The Iraqi ambassador to Tehran said renewed efforts to exchange ambassadors a quarter century after the two neighbors cut off ties, as Iran was engaged in a war with Saddam's Iraq, signaled their resolve to give a boost to cross-border ties. He further said Iran has posted a considerable pickup in its trade exports to Iraq from $1.5 billion a year ago. The Iraqi diplomat continued a railroad to connect cities across the common border is a must for the two nations, adding that train tracks will be laid in the near future to link Basra in southern Iraq to Khorramshahr in Iran's south. He then expressed hope the railway could offer special facilities for tradesmen across the border.
In Iraq, a bomb exploded outside a mosque in Baghdad on Tuesday, killing at least 11 people. Officials said 7 people were wounded in the blast in Tunis district. The bomb was apparently hidden in a motorcycle parked near the mosque. A car bomb aimed at Iraqi police commandos killed at least 5 people in Baghdad on Tuesday also. Police said civilians and police officers were among those who died in the blast, which also wounded 5 people.
The car bomb made Iraqis stood around shocked. Elsewhere, in a separate attack, gunmen in a car killed 3 men and wounded 7 among a crowd of day laborers seeking work on farms north of Baghdad. The attack occurred at Aswad near Makuba. Meanwhile, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said on Monday Iraqi forces could take charge of most of the country by December. Aides of visiting British Prime Minister Tony Blair said all foreign troops may be gone within 4 years.
As efforts to thrash out a joint strategy on Iran's nuclear case gather momentum ahead of a UN Security Council meeting on Wednesday, London comes clean over a deep division among Council members over articles of a proposed blueprint on the atomic file of Tehran.
A spokesman for the British Foreign Office said on Tuesday some parts of the document are yet to be finalized. Britain plays host to an unofficial meeting of its veto-holding counterparts, plus Germany in its capital, to work out a common line on Iran. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Manouchehr Mottaki on Tuesday expressed hope Europe's latest proposal to try to resolve the standoff on Iran's nuclear program would be comprehensive and benefit interests of the two sides. Mottaki added, quote, "We hope the offer will both serve Iran's rights and remove concerns of other states."
Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Hamid Reza Safi expresses surprise over the repetitious and unrealistic assertions of the Saudi officials on Iran's peaceful nuclear program, saying Tehran expects the officials in Riyadh not to be influenced by certain unread speculations. Safi said on Tuesday, "It seems that some people have forgotten the threats posed by the Zionist regime's atomic weaponry and are set to press Iran for its insistence on the right to use nuclear technology for civilian purposes."
Safi said Tehran's nuclear activities are under the close watch of the International Atomic Energy Agency. He underscored Iran has never been after nukes, nor does it need nuclear weapons, adding all nations are entitled to peaceful atomic know-how. The Foreign Ministry spokesman reiterated some countries have turned a blind eye to Israel's nuclear arsenal and just seek to ratchet up the pressure on Iran simply because it insists on its inalienable right to a civilian nuclear program. Safi went on to say Iran has been acting in good faith and held consultations with the Persian Gulf states to provide assurances over its peaceful nuclear agenda.
The Secretary General for the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo, Mohammed Mahdi Akef, announced that the country is witnessing setbacks regarding government political reforms, which were proposed by President Mubarak of Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood held a press conference in Cairo to discuss a number of issues, including the Egyptian judges' crisis and the random arrests and harassment of its members that followed. Under the title Setbacks of the Political Reform Process in Egypt, the Secretary General for the Muslim Brotherhood held a press conference in Cairo to respond for the first time on the Egyptian judges' crisis and the random arrests of hundreds of its members that have followed. The Secretary General condemned the government's crackdown on the Islamic group. He also criticized the government for backing off from political reforms that were promised by President Mubarak during his re-election campaign.
Political reforms in Egypt have not materialized as promised by the government. We are experiencing a complete setback. In fact, the president did quite the opposite of what he promised during his re-election campaign. I would like to cite some of these violations: deliberate delay of local government elections, the renewal of emergency laws, manipulation and fraud in university student union elections, scrutinizing vocational guilds and associations.
Mr. Akef also commented on a statement that was issued by the Egyptian Prime Minister, saying that the Muslim Brotherhood will not be allowed to take part in the future political process, and a confrontation may ensue between the Islamic group and the Egyptian authority.
The Prime Minister Ahmad Nazif's comments do not warrant a response. The least I could say is that Mr. Nazif lost touch with the people. It is not in our interest to engage in confrontation with the government. In fact, we have been patient for over 50 years. The current situation is painful, and the future does not look any brighter. We only seek salvation from God, who reassures and gives us peace of mind.
In a statement issued to the Al-Alam channel, Deputy Secretary General for the Muslim Brotherhood, Dr. Mohammed Habib, confirmed that the press conference was held in response to the Egyptian judge's crisis, the setback of government political reforms, and the Prime Minister's recent comments.
We held the press conference for several reasons. First, the setbacks of the government political reforms. Second, the judge's crisis. Third, the random roundup and arrest of political prisoners in Egypt. Fourth, the recent comments issued by the Egyptian Prime Minister Ahmad Nazif. His comments were out of context and they lacked common sense.
الأزمة بين النظام والإخوان تتفاعل يوما بعد يوم ولا يعرف أحد ماذا يمكن أن تسفر عنه.
The crisis between the Egyptian regime and the Muslim Brotherhood group is escalating, and no one can predict the outcome of this showdown. In this press conference, the Muslim Brotherhood expressed disappointment in the stalemate of government political reforms. The Islamic group also held the organization of civic society responsible for random arrests and harassment of its activists and members.
In
the Turkish capital, Ankara, the Intergovernmental Conference held a democracy assistance dialogue. The conference discussed facilitating the role of women in various fields as well as achieving development in different countries.
The conference focused on strengthening the human rights of women and enhancing their role in the process of development and political reform throughout the world and in the region. Abdullah Ghul, the Deputy Prime Minister, opened the Intergovernmental Conference of Promoting Democracy Dialogue. In his speech, he reiterated the importance of women's role in the political reform process. He called on governments to work to achieve this, and his call was echoed by conference participants.
I believe that networks of all the different countries in the region should make efforts to pressure institutions in their countries to realize more achievements for women by enriching women with the successful experiences of other women in different countries in order to improve the role of women in public life.
The conference debated the difficulties that women face in the region and how to overcome them with the support of governments and civil society organizations. This is seen as an alternative to foreign intervention to achieve the wanted reforms, thus raising the level of women's education and professionalism.
I support women's plight and their right to pursue careers. I believe that the solution to all of our development problems begins with training women to pursue a career. This is the beginning of preparing the society to accept her new role.
The Iranian delegation said that the proposed reform process only focuses on the role of working women, and they stressed the importance of women as homemakers. In general, there was a consensus by government representatives and civil society organizations on the need to establish mechanisms to realize achievements by having women participate in the democratic process, thus liberating them from poverty and ignorance. This may help women to achieve victories at all levels. The Intergovernmental Conference of Promoting Democracy Dialogue aims at improving the conditions of women politically, economically, and socially. According to the delegations and the participants, the conference is considered part of the mechanisms that are being used to reform the region, both domestically and internationally.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.